Welcome to Missions Life, where we share resources and encouragement for current missionaries, future missionaries, and those praying for missionaries. Missions can be hard, and we want to help you face the challenges of life, leadership, and ministry. We want your life to bear fruit for the gospel wherever you are. I'm Kyle Ferran, here with my co-host and wife, Heather. Hey there. Today on the podcast, I have with me Terry Cook. Terry is a leader, a teacher, a coach, and a change agent. And in 2005, Terry helped launch LDN Global to follow his heart and develop leaders who would have a worldwide impact. And Terry carries his passion to encourage, to train, and coach leaders all over the world as he shares the LDC leadership framework to bring clarity, competence, and confidence to leaders. Terry, welcome to the Missions Life podcast. I'm looking forward
to be here.
Great. That's great. I'm looking forward to our conversation today about Lead, Develop, Care, one of the books that you've put out.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it is an absolute pleasure. A few years ago, I came across your book while I was doing some coaching training, and it has been just extremely helpful to me as a leader, and also to our team leaders here in Western Europe. So thank you for your work on that. Appreciate that.
Oh, you bet.
Before we jump into questions, could you share just a little bit about your journey in ministry and leadership to give our audience just an opportunity to get to know you a little bit more?
Oh, thank you, Kyle. Yes. I grew up in a small town just outside of Dallas, Texas, and we were a religious family. We went to church regularly. And I would say that I was one of these guys who know a good bit about God. I just didn't know God. And when I was a sophomore at the University of North Texas, back in 1969, kind of the beginning of the Jesus movement, I was really searching, and I came across a student ministry called the Navigators. And through an ongoing investigative Bible study, I really began to understand what the gospel was all about, that it was not about ritual, it was about a relationship with God. And through that several week process of going through the scriptures, as as well as seeing some other students who really had a dynamic connection with God that I didn't have, I came to know God. And so that was the beginning of my sophomore year. And so for those next 3 years, I had the privilege of not only learning how to become a disciple of Christ, but how do you make disciples for Christ? And it was an exciting period in my life. And when I graduated, I moved with a Navigator staff couple from Texas to Birmingham, Alabama, just for some more training. I met my wife, Sherry, there, and we got married in 1973. And in 1974, we were asked to leave our teaching jobs and open up the Navigator ministry at the University of Alabama. So we jumped at that opportunity, and for the next 35 years, we really focused on bringing the gospel of Christ and the principles of discipleship to students at various universities and campuses. During that time, also, I had the opportunity to take on several different leadership responsibilities, from a campus director to a regional director. Most of the 90s, I was the national collegiate director for the Navigators. Then in the early 2000s, I had the opportunity to work as an assistant to the chaplain of the Senate on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. That was something that I'd always wanted to do. I prayed about it for years. And so Sherry and I moved with some of our kids who were still with us to the D.C. area. And so for a few years, I had the opportunity to work on Capitol Hill. During that time, one of my Navigator staff colleagues and dear friends and mentor, Paul Stanley, and I began talking about what we were seeing in the leader development arena, especially in Christian mission agencies. And we felt that there was a real need to bring some help to that. And so we began putting together this lead develop care model about 2004. And I was working on the Hill and also helping a little bit overseas with some mission agencies, getting it started with them. And it just began to take off. And so after a short period of time, I finally had to leave the Hill and began focusing full time. And so really about the last 18, 20 years, I've focused on helping leaders, first and foremost, to live and lead like Jesus. And then now that we've also moved into the marketplace, we want to help any leader start practicing these biblical principles that will make a huge difference, not only in their company, but in their family and in their any leadership arena that they're exercising.
Oh, that's really good. Thanks for sharing that. It's exciting to see how God moves us along the path and continues to use us in different ways there. So as I was going through your book, I noticed it was a bit different than a lot of other leadership books that I've gone through. Most leadership books, well, you're going to hit tactics or principles of leadership, and yours was different. Could you unpack a little bit what makes Lead Develop Care different than most leadership books?
Yes, thanks. First of all, let me say that there's some great resources out there. And I'm so thankful that a lot of people have put a lot of energy into writing books, doing podcasts, different things to help leaders increase. So that's I'm very grateful for that. But I think the biggest difference between LDC and some of the other things that are out there, I would phrase it this way: it's a framework, not a grab bag. And let me see if I can explain that with this illustration. I think most of our listeners would have had some experience with jigsaw puzzles. And let's just suppose that in front of you, you have a 500 piece jigsaw puzzle. All the pieces are in the box. And it's important to remember that every piece in the puzzle is important for the completion of the puzzle. You don't want to look at a piece and go, "No, I don't want to deal with that. I'm just going to throw that one away." Every piece is important, and you'll use it at some time. But at the same time, as you pick up a particular piece and you look at it, and you notice it has a different shape, it has some colors on it. It forces you to ask the question: how do I know where to put it on the board? Because as you look at all the pieces, it's just this jumble, this pile of pieces. You need the box top. It gives you the big picture. And an example of that, a quick example that people will understand, is that when you think of the question, what do you do if, heaven forbid, your clothes were to catch fire? The answer, and I use this all over the world, and everyone says it, is stop, drop, and roll. Now, when you think about it, there are other things that you could do. You could try to find a fire extinguisher. You could pick up your phone and dial for the fire department and have them come over. Or maybe you could round up some of your friends and they could come over and help you put it out. All of those things are options that you could do. You'd probably die before any of them got there. What stop, drop, and roll helps you when you're under the pressure to do the right thing immediately. It tells you everything you need to know and do, not the 20 options that you could do, but what are the absolutely few things that you could do. And that's what a framework is. It's a mental construct or a word picture that gives that clarity and relationship of the pieces. The question is, though, where is our leadership box top? all of us over the years have been collecting tips and tricks, tools and practices, principles and concepts, all of which are helpful. And like the pieces in the jigsaw puzzle, you don't want to throw any of them out. But again, the question is, how do you make sense of it all? How do you know which piece to use, when, how, and so forth? And I find that most of the time, as leaders, when I look back over my years, decades even of leadership experience, as I face different things, I would sort of reach into the grab bag full of these tips and tricks and say, well, maybe I can use this. It worked before. Maybe I can use it again. And it may or it may not actually be effective. What a framework can help you to do is not just hopefully almost blind with a blindfold on, pull something out of the grab bag and see if it works. It's a way to be reasoned and rational about what you absolutely must do at this particular point. And so I find that we tend to complicate leadership. In fact, years ago when I was doing one of the seminars on lead developed care, and there was a man there from Atlanta, and he he really connected with the model. And I was chatting with him by phone a couple of weeks afterwards, and I said, "Hey, what's your response to this now?" And he says, "Hey, I loved your model, it's so forth, but I felt it was lacking a few things." Uh, and I felt like it wasn't quite comprehensive enough. So I've worked on a new model. And I said, "Really?" "Well, tell me about it." He said, "Yeah, it has 19 primary responsibilities where we have 3. And I said, "Wow, 19, that must be pretty comprehensive." Then I asked him this question: "Do you have the model in front of you?" And he said, "No." I said, "Can you see the model right now?" He said, "No." I said, "Okay, give me the 19 points in your model." He could come up with 3.
Oh no, not very effective to remember
And
there on the fly.
and that was the point. It was like, okay, this is a model that you just created, and yet you can't even remember it. And that's why we've wanted our framework to be simple enough to where it's easy to remember. You can think about it as you're going to the office. At the same time, it is comprehensive enough because we have found every people leadership issue you can face can find its home under one of those 3.
That's really good.
And it enables you to be proactive, not just reactive. And it's also reproducible. For you to tell the next generation of leaders, here are the 19 things you have to think about every time you walk into the office. I mean, they're not going to be able to pick that up. So we have found that by really focusing in on a framework and then keeping the grab bag of tips and tricks, but then filtering those through the framework provides a much better approach to leadership.
Well, thank you. That's a really good, and yeah, in my own personal experience, that's definitely what I found was uh, being in leadership for. I think it had been about 8 or 9 years when I found your book, and I had a massive grab bag, but I hadn't found that framework yet. And this really, really helped me to be able to fit a lot of those things under them and be able to categorize them and better use them actually,
Mm-hmm.
because I could see where they fit better. And now everything that comes in as I read it, I can mentally kind of put it in its right place
Yeah.
and be able to use it better then. So it's been very
Good.
helpful for that. So
Oh, good.
one other question there was, how does lead developed care fit in with servant leadership? We hear a lot about that. Talk to us about that. Where does that fit?
Oh, that's such a great question. And it relates to a very great concept, the servant leader concept. And yet, let me be a little bit provocative here by saying that while the servant leader model is very important. It can also be a trap for leaders if you use it for what leaders do. And let me explain it. We tell our Christian audiences that we want to live and lead like Jesus. So who is our model for what leadership is all about? Well, obviously it's Jesus. And I like to ask this question: what does that look like? Well, typically they jump to John 13, which is Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And we've kind of translated that into, if you want to lead like Jesus, you should do the low, menial tasks that no one else wants to do. And I said, well, let's take a deeper look at that. And Jesus does something very provocative, so provocative. Peter even said, "You're not going to wash my feet." And what he was basically saying to Jesus was, Jesus, rabbis do not wash the feet of their students. It was so radical, so shocking. And yet Jesus not only did that, he says in verse 15, I leave you an example that you should go and do likewise. Now, I like to ask the question at that point, do you think the disciples ever forgot that? Do you ever picture them 6 months later sitting around a campfire one evening and one of them saying, what was it that Jesus did that last night? Seems like it was something a bit shocking, but I can't quite remember what it was. No, absolutely. They never forgot it. It was seared into their consciousness. Well, then here's the question that follows. If Jesus demonstrated it, if Jesus commanded them to go and do likewise, and if they never forgot it, how many examples in the rest of the New Testament do you see the disciples washing feet? And the answer is there are no examples of the disciples washing feet. And in fact, in Acts chapter 6, where you see they had the opportunity to do something similar, which is waiting on tables and the distribution of the food, their response was, we're not going to do that. We're going to give ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. We ponder that, and it forces us to ask, how did the disciples miss it? It was so vividly demonstrated by Jesus, and it was a command, and yet nowhere else in the New Testament do we see them ever doing anything like it. Well, I think the answer is they didn't miss it. We miss it. I would suggest that John 13 is not the example of what leaders do. It's the great example of who leaders are. And there's a big difference. If you, again, as I stated at the beginning, if you use the washing of feet, which again we translate into doing the low menial tasks that no one else wants to do, then you end up spending all of your time running around filling up everyone's coffee cup, thinking that you're leading them when you're not actually leading them. You are serving, but it's not the same thing as leading. And in fact, it keeps you from doing the things that leaders must do. So the servant leader model is really important in terms of who leaders are. A servant leader does whatever the Father asks him to do. He or she can be the President of the United States, or they can clean toilets, whatever the Father asks them to do. They can serve anywhere on the serving spectrum, but it's not a substitute for leading. I would say that the dominant leadership metaphor in the scriptures for what leaders do is the shepherd model. And it's replete throughout the Old and the New Testament. David in the Psalm 23, he does not say, the Lord is my servant. He says, the Lord is my shepherd. In Psalm 72, It says, David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them. Again, in the New Testament, John 10, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. And then you look a little bit further in 1 Peter 5, Peter tells the elders to shepherd the flock that God had given them. So our lead, develop, care model came from an inductive study of the shepherd model in both the Old and the New Testament. And while the servant leader model is critically important in terms of who a leader is, it's quite different from what a leader is to do.
That's really good. That's some good food for thought there to evaluate, because it is easy to if our default is just to serve, that doesn't give us a very good filter
Mm-hmm.
to be able to evaluate decisions on. So,
Yes.
well, as we look at, let's unpack the book a little bit here. That has the three key areas: the lead, develop, and care. Talk to us a little bit about the first part, lead.
Yeah, let me, Kyle, just give you a quick, big overview snapshot of the model in case someone hasn't
Great.
actually seen the model or read the book. There are two key components to the model. Picture three circles, a Venn diagram, if you will, that are overlapping. And we call those three the primary responsibilities. And that is, again, not the 20 responsibilities leaders can do. The operative word is the word primary. Here are the three that they must do, and that's lead, develop, and care. And then the second component is that we have three rings, one for each of the primary responsibility that circles that particular responsibility. And we call those the operational aspects. The circles tell us what we are to do, the rings tell us how we actually put that responsibility into operation. So the first one we start with is lead. And the reason we start with lead is that it's foundational to the whole concept of leadership. It's the core of the word leader. And it's fallen onto some hard times lately. We find that a lot, especially younger people, are steering away from the concept of leadership. They say, I don't want to be a leader. I want to be a facilitator. I want to be a coordinator. We've even had some who say, if I have to be in a leadership position, I'll lead without authority. And I always say, good luck. Hope you can do it, because you can't lead without authority. And it's actually a very great concept. Let me give you the definition of each one of these as we go through it, because I think there are a lot of great definitions out there. But let me give you ours
Okay, great.
that fits this particular one. And we define lead as intentionally influencing and enabling people to accomplish a given task. Notice that we began the definition with the word intentionally. Good leading doesn't just happen. It requires intentionality. It requires forethought, planning. It involves work. And it's designed to help those who look to you for leadership to be successful in what they've been asked to do. A good leader is always trying to help others be a success. And so it's critically important to remember that you can't delegate this away. The other two, develop and care, you can have others really come along and help you with it. And I don't mean to communicate that lead is something you do totally by yourself, but it's a responsibility you have to own yourself. And so we can't shy away from it. We have to give time and attention to it.
And you mentioned also in there just that it's to accomplish a given task. It's not just making people happy. That there is something there, a measurable thing that you're looking to accomplish through this. It's that thought that was really helpful. Good reminder there that it's not just
Yes.
about making the troops happy. It's actually about getting something done and doing what we're called to do.
Yeah. In fact, leadership always begins with a task. And it's interesting when we do a seminar from time to time, we'll illustrate this. We'll have people sitting at tables, and then I'll ask them to all stand, and they all stand and they're looking at me, and if I'm doing it, for about 20 awkward seconds, and they're expecting me to do something. And then I throw this out. I say, okay, at each table, I want you to organize yourself according to age, oldest to youngest. Go. That's interesting. That's all the instruction I give them. But you can, at every table, somebody will step up and go, oh, when were you born? What year were you born? Okay, you're over here. Okay, you move over here. And then we finish in just a few seconds. I said, now, when I ask all of you to stand and then I paused, was there a need for a leader at your table? No, because there was no task. You were just standing there. But as soon as I gave a task, a very simple task, somebody jumped up to take the leadership role. And I didn't assign any of you to do that. You just did it. There's something about leaders, when they see a task, they want to move toward accomplishing it. So again, I was just at an Air Force base in Alaska doing this about 3 weeks ago in January, extremely cold.
Great
We
time
were
to visit,
working with
right?
Air Force officers. And at the end of the time, we asked everyone, hey, give us one takeaway from the seminar. And here was one female officer who said that her biggest takeaway was that she thought she was leading her troops by caring for them. And now she sees that she should care for her team by leading them well.
Hmm.
So it's not just enough to help everyone feel that they're appreciated. All of that's key, and we'll get to that in care. The key thing a leader has to do is that they have a job to do, a mission to accomplish. Results matter. And it's not just that I'm here to make sure everyone feels like they're appreciated and cared for.
Yeah. There's a balance there that's needed for things. So that's good. What is so the second part there is develop, and this isn't something that's on every leader's radar. What does it involve? What makes it important? Why do we need to develop other leaders?
Yes, it's surprising. It surprises a lot of people that we have developed in there, because I've had executives tell me that they don't hire people to develop them. They hire people who are already developed. And that's a very short-sighted perspective. Now I understand what they're saying. If they're going to put out a lot of money, or if they're going to bring someone if you're going to bring someone into your mission agency, you don't have to pay for all of their education. You're assuming there's a certain level of proficiency that they already have. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the point is that our whole lives are built around development. We were not born fully developed human beings. We were born as infants. And from that day on, every day, every week, every month, every year is a development process. Now you get to the point where you have certain proficiencies, but catch this. This is our definition, and I'll show you how that applies. Our definition of develop is intentionally strengthening people's capacity to grow and contribute. Okay, intentionally strengthening people's capacity to grow and contribute. Now, notice what we didn't say. We did not say that develop is in strengthening is to intentionally strengthen people's capacity to work harder and produce more. When we say that, and that's what a lot of people are after, the focus is on their output. And it basically communicates that you are a cog in the machine. Many executives, and we see this in mission agencies, we see this in companies as well. Many executives or supervisors have a consumer approach to their people. And by that, I mean, it's like the coffee cup I got this morning at Panera Bread Company. That coffee cup helps me consume that coffee. But what did I do with the coffee cup once the coffee was gone? I
Probably
tossed
threw
it.
it away.
Yeah, it's in the trash can. And a lot of people do that. They view their employees, they view even their teammates that way. That you are here to produce. I want to get out of you what you have. And as soon as that is consumed, I'm going to get rid of you because there are 20 more people waiting behind who can step into your place. And it's a very short sighted approach when we do that. When we don't add develop, we basically mortgage the future.
Hmm.
It's it pays a lot of dividends. It's a present activity that pays future dividends. Develop, we have found over years, though, is the one primary responsibility that's missing the most.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's because it's the hardest. What companies will do, what mission agencies even will do, what churches will do, they want to do some leader development. And so they schedule something in their calendar and they'll bring someone like us in and say, can you actually do your LDC seminar? Sure. We come in, we give them 2 days, 1 day, 3 days, whatever. And then we leave. And what they do, they tend to check off leader development for the year. Okay, we're supposed to do it. We did it, done. Now it's back to usual. But when you look at our primary responsibility, I mean, when you look at the operational aspects for develop, which are teach, model, and coach, it involves a process. And in Western education, over the last probably 150 years, we've assumed that if you give them information, that they are developed. I went to the seminar, I got the t-shirt, I've got the notebook, and therefore I'm trained. And that is not the case. Having the knowledge does not mean that you're developed in the knowledge. And in the
Yeah.
book, I even used the illustration of my brother, who was an 8th grade English teacher. And the first day of class every year, he would teach the students how to juggle. And he'd say, here are the 3 steps to juggling. First you do this, and then you do that, and then you do this, whatever it was. And he said he would pound it into them. And after about 20 minutes, he would demonstrate it and pound it into them. And then after about 20 minutes, he would say, okay, pop quiz. Pull out a sheet of paper. So they'd pull out a sheet of paper and he'd say, what are the 3 steps to juggling? And he said you could just see the excitement in their faces because on the first test of the year, they know the answers. So they fill it out, exchange papers, grade it. Everyone makes 100, they pass it back. And then he asked this question: how many of you did not know how to juggle before today? And most of the hands went up. And he would point out someone, maybe Susan. So, Susan, you didn't know how to juggle before today? No. What'd you make on the test? 100. Okay, Susan, come up. He'd have her come up in front of the class. He would hand her the 3 tennis balls, step back, and then say, okay, Susan, let's see you juggle. 100% of the time, the response of the student was always the same. I don't know how to juggle. He said, wait, what did you make on the test? 100. No, Susan, you do know how to juggle. Now, what was he trying to illustrate? He was trying to illustrate that education is not just about facts. It's not just about information. Information is important, but it's not enough in and of itself to bring about change. To really bring about change, you have to do some other things. You have to practice it. You need someone to watch you as you practice it, and then they need to give you feedback to let you know how you're doing. So that's why I think develop is missing so much, because it takes so much work. It's so much easier for them to read a book, listen to a podcast, go to a seminar. We check it off saying they're developed, when that's in fact not the case.
Hmm. Yeah, I see. Noticing more and more just in my own leadership that it's not just about knowing what to do, it's having the emotional capacity and the emotional depth to be able to handle those different leadership situations as well. And that just takes time of
Mm-hmm.
growth, of doing it. Um, a great quote I
Yeah.
heard years ago was if more information was all we needed, we'd all be billionaires with six packs, because all the information is there. I've read exercise books for years and I've read different investing things. Now, I'm not a Warren Buffett. I'm not an Arnold Schwarzenegger. It takes, there's a lot of work involved in that. There's a lot of doing, and yeah. And so we need not only just the information, but we need just the practice, the coaching, the mentorship, and helping us through that process
Yeah,
as well. And it takes
that's so
time.
key. Yeah. Hey, let me mention one other aspect. Maybe
Hmm.
it's a little bit provocative on this element of develop. Our three operational aspects are teach, model, coach. And that is, they need information, they need observation, and they need feedback. A lot of coaching today is done by Zoom. And I use Zoom every day because we work with leaders. We've coached over 6,000 leaders, right, from
Wow.
90 different countries. And obviously we can't be with every one of them. We're doing this call on Zoom as we speak. But here's the downside about uh, virtual coaching. There's a saying, I think it was an Air Force officer who said, virtual presence is actual absence. Now, and here's the downside of that. If I were coaching you and you live in Spain and I live in Virginia, and I'm coaching you in a particular area, and I haven't been with you to actually watch you do that.
Hmm.
We jump on the Zoom call. I ask you, hey, how'd it go? And you tell me how it went. Now, I know you're not trying to deceive me. You're not trying to pull something over my eyes. You're sharing as honestly as you can. But I'm only seeing it through your perspective. I actually didn't watch how it went. When I was in a national leadership role, I was about to introduce a new initiative. And so I pulled my regional directors together. We met and I threw this idea out to them, and I was very enthusiastic about it. When I got home that evening, my wife Sherry said, hey, how did it go? And I said, great. She said, did you introduce this new idea? And I said, yes. And she asked, how did it go? I said, it was terrific. I think they really bought it. And then she asked this question. She said, what pushback did you have? I said, well, there was no pushback. And she said, why wasn't there any pushback? I said, well, I thought through how to present it. I kind of anticipated the questions they might ask. And so I answered those. And I think they got it. And they saw that we needed it and there was no pushback. Because Sherry knows me so well, she said, I think you ought to ask him why there was no pushback. And I said, no, this. And she said, no, I think you ought to ask him. And okay, I'll ask. The next morning, as we started, I said, before we move on with the agenda, I just want to ask you, why was there no pushback on the idea that I introduced yesterday? Instantly, I knew I was in trouble.
Uh-oh.
I had 8 regional leaders in the room, and they all started looking at each other, and they were kind of nodding to each other like, you tell them. And finally, Dan, one of my directors from Southern California, had the courage to say, Terry, the reason there was no pushback is that we've come to realize that when you're excited about an idea, you are going to do it. We cannot out-argue you, and we are tired of trying.
Wow.
Now, here's the point. If you had been my coach in that first evening, you said, hey, how did it go? And I said, oh, it went well. I anticipated what they were going to ask, and I answered it. And I think they really understood it and bought it. But you were not there, and you were not my wife, who knows me better than anyone else. You would not have seen the attempts during the discussion to ask a question. Well, what about what? I've got that covered. Well, what about what? We've already thought about that. If you had been there, you would have seen that I bulldozed everyone in there. So instead of saying what you probably would have said, hey, great job, Terry, of presenting it, thinking it through, trying to anticipate and answer questions. Great job on your leadership. You would have, if you had been sitting there, you would have seen this is a disaster. He has totally lost the room. See, but it takes time to do that. It costs you to do that. It takes being with them, etc. And so, therefore, we look for easier ways to go about it. And again, like I said, I use Zoom every day virtually. But what I try to mix in is throughout the year, I'm doing trips to different countries to be with our teams, to be with them and then with their leadership arenas so that I can kind of watch and get to know different people, et cetera, et cetera. It helps me to do a better job of developing them because I actually saw it and also know the effect that that person's leadership is having on the rest of the team. But it's extremely costly.
Yeah,
And
that would
we
take a lot more
tend to opt
time.
for easier things.
No, that's really good, though. I mean, when you think about like a basketball coach or someone like that, their ability to really instruct you is as they watch you and can be able to take what you're doing and that feedback and be able to really then coach you to hone your skills. But if they just said, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing pretty good. I feel like it's great. That's very different. So, yeah, that's really good point there.
Yeah.
The last part of the book called Care, or last section there, could you unpack how we care well and why it's so critical to our leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never met a leader who said, I don't care for the people I'm leading. And yet, when we do exit surveys with people who are actually leaving that organization or that company, we hear a totally different story. They don't feel cared for. And I think the reason for that is that most leaders are looking at the big picture and oftentimes they'll feel care in their heart, in their soul. Yeah, I really do care for my people, but they don't know how to go from their heart to action. How do you actually demonstrate that? It's one thing to say it. In fact, I just saw a survey that Deloitte had done, and it said, executives, you're wrong. 75% of your employees are saying the health of the organization is in terrible shape when you feel like that they're doing a great job. Well, I happen to know someone who works for Deloitte, and he just took a leave of absence because he felt like he needed to take a break just for his own mental health. And we can look out and we can see certain things, and we can even say certain things, but we haven't figured out how to actually demonstrate that.
Hmm.
So with us, we wanted to help leaders go from their heart to their hands, so to speak. And with our operational aspects for care, we have four, know, connect, provide, protect. And the first two are actually the hardest ones to do. Know is all about awareness. And I think oftentimes we just don't see what we should be seeing. We, I've had executives tell me this. I'll say, how do you feel like things are going in the office? He'll look out and he'll look he sees the different cubicles in his office, and he says, well, everyone's here and everyone's working. I think we're doing fine. Yeah, but do you really know? Tell me about Susan over here. How about David over there? What's going on with them? How do you feel like they're doing? Oftentimes, they don't know how to actually do that. And then connect is even harder. Connect is all about understanding. How do you how are you able to get to know them to the point where you understand where they're coming from? It doesn't mean that you necessarily agree with where they're coming from or the stand that they're taking, but are you able to fully understand it and communicate that you understand where they're coming from? We had a situation where one organization, one Christian organization, was giving the leadership was giving a presentation where the guy giving the presentation was talking about how they had met and had come up with certain decisions. And one of the women in the group who knew more about that situation than anyone else had not been asked to be a part of that committee. And she finally raised the question and just said, well, why wasn't I asked to be on that? Because that's where I work. And she had been in leadership for a number of years and was quite capable. And the guy giving the actual presentation kept saying, no, 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 you don't understand. No, you don't understand. And then she finally broke down and started crying. And he said, no, but you don't understand. We weren't trying to do this. So I finally called for a timeout. I said, let's take a coffee break. So I went with the guy who was giving the presentation, and I said, what message are you communicating to her? You're saying to her, the reason you're upset is that you don't understand. You're the problem. If you understood, you wouldn't be feeling the way that you do. And he said, well, what could I have done? And I said, what if you had said this? Wow. Let me call her Heather. What if you had said, wow, Heather, I can tell this is really hitting you hard. And I think if I were in your shoes, I would be feeling exactly the same thing. Why don't we backstroke on this? Let's take some time out and let's chat together. And I want to understand further, where you're coming from and what your thoughts are. I said, it may not change ultimately what the committee decided, but you were able to really connect with her and keep her as part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the other two, provide and protect. A lot of times we find leaders say, well, I've offered them a job. They've got a position in our organization. They're getting paid. What more do they want? What more can I provide them? Well, there's a lot more that can be provided for them. Are you giving them your time? Are you giving them feedback? Are you giving them? Are you providing them with opportunity? We got some exercises in the back of the book that uh, kind of points out, it helps leaders rather uh, do a little bit more in-depth look at some things that they can provide. And then, of course, protect is all about safety.
Hmm.
Are you providing the environment? What we have found, and there have been studies on this, that it goes like this: people leave bosses; they don't necessarily leave companies.
Yeah, I've heard
And
that.
uh, and I've seen example after example of leaders who have really hurt people. I've done that in my own leadership, hurt people totally unintentionally, but did not provide them with an element of safety to show that I really did care for them.
Hmm. That's really a important aspect there of care and just having people feel heard and understood. Yeah, like you said, even if it doesn't change necessarily the outcome, it does change how it feels to be able to make sure that the people have felt heard and cared for in that. Yeah, sometimes you can't always change the decision, but you can acknowledge the how it feels in the
Mm-hmm.
process. So that's
Yeah,
really good.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
One other angle on looking at lead developed care is, it has three key parts to it there. How does that in practice divide out your focus or your attention? Do you spend a third of your time leading, a third of your time developing, a third of your time caring, or how does that work out
Well, we
practically?
are asked that question quite often, Kyle. Thanks for
Okay.
asking it. Let me mention two things about it. Uh, the first thing is that we like to always say that the three primary responsibilities of lead development and care are equal in terms of their importance and value. One is not more important than the other. That's why even in the way that we shaped the graphic on it, we have lead at the top, but it's at a 15-degree angle from being totally on the top. Because you do need to start with the lead if you're in a leadership role, but we want to illustrate that all three are important and they're always in play. The question you're always asking is, what's needed now? Okay. 2 or 3 years ago, everyone knows, we got hit with this worldwide pandemic called COVID. And obviously, care rose to the top. People were asking, am I going to be alive next week? Is my company going to survive? Will I have a job? Will my children be okay? Et cetera, et cetera. So care really rotated to, at that particular time, to be the one that needed the most attention. But in a normal leadership atmosphere, apart from the pandemic or tragedy or something like that, just in a typical leadership role, if you're in a leadership position with a company or a church or a mission agency or something like that, this is this is what we would say. The three are equal in importance and value, but they're not equal in expression.
Okay.
And I would illustrate it this way. Picture, if you're a meat eater, picture that you go out for a meal and you got a big steak. That's your entree. We would say that would equate to the lead component. And then you have a baked potato that's full of butter and sour cream. That's your side dish. We would say in practice, in terms of how much focus you give, that would be about 15%. Oh, that would be your uh, that would equate to the develop. And then you have some seasoning on the table. Maybe it's salt. And we would say that would equal the care. And in terms of proportions, and this is not scientific, this is just from our experience, we would say that lead probably should occupy about 80% of your
Okay.
focus. If you're in a typical leadership role, 80% of it should be developed. It should be focused on lead. 15%, your side dish, is on develop, and 5% to care. Now we always get this reaction. It's it's a very provocative statement, especially for those who are where care is their strength. Okay, and I ask them, "How does that make you feel?" And they say it really makes us feel devalued. I said, "Well, let me try to explain." With this illustration of the steak, the side dish, the steak, baked potato, and salt, we're not saying that care is less important. We're trying to illustrate how powerful seasoning is. Just because you have the equivalent of a measuring cup of baked potato sitting there, you would not say, well, to be equal, I've got to have a cup of salt to go with it. Seasoning in the right proportion flavors the whole meal.
Yeah,
Okay? If
absolutely.
you if you get too much seasoning, it ruins the dish. Okay? It is so powerful. It's critically important for everyone to remember that lead developing care are always in play. You never put one in the garage. You're always doing all three. But care done properly is so powerful, you don't normally need to have it in excess. If you do, it it can cause problems. In fact, one of the women that I'm coaching works for a company, and I just asked her recently, "How are things going with the team?" And she said, all of us are about to quit the company. I said, "Really? Why?" She said, "Because the project manager, his strength is care, and all he does is care. And consequently, things are not getting done, reports are not finished. No one is finishing their particular aspect of the project. We're having to cover for each other because of this slack, and yet all that the boss is saying is everyone okay? Does everyone feel appreciated? It's great having you in the company." And it's very, very frustrating when it's overdone.
Yeah.
So now, let me mention one other quick thing on that. I had a mom come up to me after I shared that at a break, and she said, "Terry, I'm a stay at home mom. I've got three small kids, all under the age of 5. And I just don't think 80% of my day, 80% of my time and attention and focus is on lead." I said, "Oh, no, it's probably hardly there." For you in your situation at this stage in your life, care and develop would probably occupy about 90-95% of your time. Okay. You're bringing up these little children. You're the main caregiver. You're the one that's really developing them toward being a responsible adult. But you'll find that as they grow and as they get into adolescence, as they get into their teenage years, that lead component is going to actually take on more and more significance. So
Yeah.
there are stages that you go in, there are circumstances that you find yourself in where you, again, answer the question, what's needed now? And that's what you go with.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that, Terry. Now we're almost kind of nearing up to the end of our time here, but as you look at the book, it's not a huge book, but what does it take to really understand and implement the principles there in lead developed care?
Yeah. I often tell people, I think this discourages them, but I try to explain it so it doesn't discourage them. We say, the model is simple. It takes, we say it this way, it takes 20 minutes to learn it. It takes 2 years to get it. And here's the reason we say it. It's almost like playing the piano. There are just a handful of notes, basic notes on the piano. And you can learn those, 7 or 8 notes, I think, are the primary notes. But to really learn how to play them, it just takes lots and lots of practice. And that's what it does with this. You can get it. And in fact, when people leave our seminar, they walk out, almost all of them saying, wow, I got it and I can use it tomorrow. And we want to send them out. Yes, go to it. But we're also thinking, no, you actually don't get it yet fully. But start using it, start applying it. And what's also extremely helpful, if they can do it, is that if you can be with other leaders who understand the lead developed care model, they have the same nomenclature, they have the same vocabulary. For you all to meet together from time to time, we have an exercise we call the think tank, where actually you work through the model on a particular leadership opportunity or challenge. You use it as an algorithm rather
Nice.
than just brainstorming. Let's just reach in and throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks. You actually work through the process. Is it a lead or a developer or care issue? Why? Okay. From that, if you think it's a lead, is it a set direction, align, motivate, or manage issue, or why? And And then what are your next steps? Well, when you can be guided by the framework, then if you involve others with you in that process, it really helps you get a better perspective on the leadership opportunity or challenge. It helps you to think deeper on what you think it is and what your next step should be. So it just, what we say, use it, but don't use it in isolation. Use it and then meet with others who can help you process it. And that's where coaching actually really comes into play to the most, is when you have a coach who can actually walk with you in your practice of lead developing care. It
Hmm.
helps you to get it. I've had so many leaders as I've been with them in their leadership situation, and we set up certain situations where I can watch them do different elements of the model. And then in the evenings, we'll go out for dinner and we just talk about the day. It's so rewarding to hear these really sharp key leaders as we ask questions and talk about it, to say, oh, so that's what alignment looks like, you know. But it took them hearing it, it took them seeing it, and then doing it, and then having the opportunity to have some coaching on it for them to really, for it to become embedded in their thinking. One last thing on it, we like to say, LDC is not something you do, it's the way you do everything.
Hmm.
So anytime you're in a leadership situation with your kids, in your family, at work, in your ministry, whatever the case might be, if you're um, in that leadership role, if you will view LDC not as this simple tool that you hang on your tool belt and you pull it out once or twice a year, but rather it's the framework through which you look at every leadership situation that you have, that will really help you make it become a part of your regular leadership practice.
That's really helpful. Anything else? We have a few little fun questions at the end there, but anything else you'd like to encourage people with before we jump into those real quick?
Well, I think I would just leave the audience with this, that leadership is a fantastic opportunity. We use a quote by Henry Cloud that says, "You are ridiculously in charge." Okay, and I think I was fascinated by his use of that adverb, ridiculously, and I think he's trying to communicate that we, as a leader, have more opportunity than we actually realize that we have. And the reason why that's significant is that as you go back to Genesis chapter 1, I like to ask the question, what was the first message the first couple heard from God in the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. And Genesis 1:28 is called the creation mandate. We kind of have always looked at that as, well, what they heard was, well, reproduce more, be fruitful and multiply. But here's the message they actually heard. If I can put it in the vernacular, the message they heard was this: you're in charge. I made everything. I created you in my image, and now you're in charge. You're to rule, subdue, and have dominion over. So the very first thing that God says to him was not, you shall love me with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. As important as that is, extremely important. He didn't even tell them, look, as a couple, you need to love each other as you love yourself. Again, extremely important. I think it's very intriguing that the very first thing he said to him was, you're in charge. You're the leaders. The second thing he said to him was, be a leader developer. I want you to create more like you. I create you to be a leader and create more to be a leader. And so I think in the church, the reason I bring that up, I think in the church, with my navigator background, people have asked me, Terry, you've done so much in discipleship. Why are you now putting the emphasis in leadership? And I say, I'm always doing discipleship, but this is something I think that the church has missed. And I think the mandate in Genesis 1 is still in effect. It's to be demonstrated in the home, at work, in ministry, if you're coaching your kid's soccer team, whatever the arena, that mandate is still there, that we need to be the leader that God wants us to be. And yet we haven't helped people know how to do it effectively. And we feel like the lead developed care model can really help with that. But the ultimate thing there is, don't shy away from it. Move toward it, because it is a fantastic opportunity. It's not easy, but it's a thrilling adventure. And we want to see more and more people step up toward leadership.
Absolutely. Well, Terry, it's been a real joy to have you on here with us and just to get your thoughts and your experience from that. I've enjoyed it. I hope others will also glean some things from that. At the end of the podcast, we like to ask a few just kind of random fun questions. And so, what is something you've read recently or listened to that you've enjoyed or found helpful?
Yeah. Someone asked me recently, Terry, with all your travels, what are there some really key books that you studied? Do you just do Bible study on the plane? Which Christian books are you reading? And I always surprise them with, no, I don't. I love Bible study. I spend time every day in the Word. I've read zillions of Christian books, but for me, at this stage of my life, I love reading a great mystery, a great uh, international intrigue series, or something like that. And they kind of looked a bit shocked. And I said, look, the reason why I do that is that I think we put ourselves under the pressure of every free moment we have. We should be doing something that deals with the Bible, or with Christian literature. And again, I'm not demeaning those at all, but life is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter dash. And now in a few weeks, I turn 74, and I'm realizing this more and more. It really is a marathon, and you've got to learn to pace yourself. And so, are there some things that you can do? Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's taking a walk, maybe it's just reading some fun novels that just give you a break and allows you to kind of relax a little bit, rather than constantly placing yourselves under pressure to always be producing more. To always, I want to take advantage of every second that I've got to do something greater or better or improve myself. Well, the thing I'm learning is, Yeah, that's true. But it is a marathon, and learn to do those things that really give you a break rather
That's good.
than always feeling like you have to do more.
So, kind of on that same topic, then, what activity or hobby do you do to stay energized or refreshed,
Yeah, great
other than
question.
reading? And maybe that's the one there.
Well, reading is it for me. I mean, it's the main thing. I was an English major, so I grew up reading, and I still love to read. I think the other thing that I truly love to do. My wife Sherry and I have been married for a little over 50 years, and we've always enjoyed just walking together, taking walks together. Where we live here in Charlottesville, Virginia, we're surrounded by trees, and there are hiking trails all around us, and just to be able to uh, maybe even just 15 or 20 minutes, and behind our house is, full of trees. There's a river back there, and we'll just say, let's just do a walk. And I find that whether we're fully engaged in conversation or just walking together, I'm walking with the one person who's my best friend, and that energizes me more than anything that I do.
The last thing, Terry, just where can people find out more about you or your book?
Okay, thank you. Well, we have a website. It's leaddevelopcare.com. Very simple,
Easy to remember.
leaddevelopcare.com. We have some resources on there. There's information. There's a store. I'm not saying this just to push materials, but along with my book, and we actually have a study guide to the book. If you want to do it, say with a small group, how do you learn to understand and practice this together? We've got a study guide that goes with it. That's available on the website. Plus, we have a lot of cards. We have found that uh, with leaders, oftentimes they need reminders, they need little helps, and so we've got little cards that you can. They're available on the website that you can order. That once the LDC model, and I mentioned the think tank. There's a card on how you do that, how you do the face tool, and that's how you diagnose the situation by yourself. That's We have one that's called the Four Conversations, and that is oftentimes we out of a seminar we leaders leave with this question. This has been so helpful to me. How can I get it to my team? And they can get the book. There's an ebook, free ebook on the website as well. But we also have this thing called Four Conversations, and that is how can you sit down at four breakfasts at Panera or McDonald's or wherever you eat breakfast. How can you sit down four different times, take 45 minutes each session, and work someone through the lead develop care model? So it's all there. It's simple. You can stick it in your pocket or your purse. And so we have those resources because, again, we want to help people actually practice it. And so those are some of the things that are available there.
Sounds like some great resources there. Terry, we're really thankful for you joining us on the Missions Podcast or Missions Life podcast today. And it's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kyle.
Well, that's all for this show, and we want to thank you again for spending your valuable time with us today.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider taking just a moment and giving us a great review. Your review will help people find the podcast and allow these resources to encourage more people. If you took something valuable away from this episode, please share it with someone who would enjoy it.
If you'd like to find the show notes, blog posts, and free resources for ministry and leadership, as well as some information on my book, Overflowing, visit kylefarran.com. That's KYLEFARRAN.com. Hope to see you soon on a future podcast.